The $400 billion water lie. Why bottled water is a scam. The call came at 7:42 a.m. Stop serving water. A cafeteria worker in a suburban school held up a half-empty bottle. It smelled sweet, then chemical. By noon, pallets were barricaded, parents were lining up, and the district announced a recall. The brand, a household name that promised purity, tests flagged contamination. The company urged calm. Kids dumped bottles into sinks while teachers whispered, "Is the tap safer?" In 24 hours, fear flipped direction. The bottle symbolized trust until it didn't. To understand why that crack spread from one lunchroom to your refrigerator, we need to go back, before the plastic, before the prestige. The prestige myth is born. Start at the springs. 19th century America sent its ailing to places with names like Saratoga and White Sulphur. Doctors prescribed the waters. People believed minerals could cure nerves, gout, melancholy. The experience mattered as much as the glass. Bandstands, promenades, uniforms, rituals. Water wasn't just hydration, it was status wrapped in healing. Europe refined the theater. At Vichy and Spa, royals posed for engravings while bottlers learned a simple trick: capture an aura, then ship it. Glass clinked in dining rooms, thick, weighty, expensive. When Perrier began exporting in the early 20th century, it didn't sell bubbles, it sold Frenchness. Slim green bottles, etched labels, the suggestion that your table mattered. Then came Evian, whispering a mountain fairy tale. From the French Alps wasn't a location, it was a story with snow as a character. Their ads didn't talk about pathogens. They showed mist, rock, time. You weren't buying water, you were buying patience aged by geology. And crucially, the bottle stayed glass, the vessel of care, the opposite of municipal. Meanwhile, in the United States, a different narrative was forming. After rivers caught fire and pipes turned brown, Congress passed the Safe Drinking Water Act in 1974. The EPA set standards, insisted on testing, and forced public reporting. Cities invested. For a generation, tap water was a public promise, regulated, cheap, boring. The ritual moved from resorts to kitchen sinks. But the old spring mythology didn't die. It waited. In the 1980s, glossy magazines carried full-page spreads of dew on limestone. Words like natural, artesian, untouched flowed across copy that never quite defined them. Lawyers and marketers learned to thread needles. From a protected source, bottled at the source, mineral balanced. Each phrase leaned on romance more than regulation. Definitions existed, but they were narrow and technical, and most consumers never saw them. Get this, bottled water wasn't competing with tap, it was competing with embarrassment. Ordering a French bottle at lunch signaled taste. Celebrities held Perrier like an accessory. Aerobics culture grabbed clear plastic like a badge. Hydration became lifestyle. The old spa language morphed into wellness, and wellness spoke in imported vowels. What nobody knew at the time was how fragile that balance would be once the category scaled. Early on, volume stayed small and premium. The value came from scarcity and symbolism, but there was a ceiling to how many people would pay for glass stories. The industry needed a pivot: keep the aura, drop the cost, flood the market. Before that pivot, a few seeds were planted. Supermarkets began stocking spring waters from New England and Appalachia, names like Poland Spring and Deer Park, wrapping local geology in regional pride. The message was consistent: this isn't processed, it's born. And that left a ghost idea in people's heads: if this is born, the other stuff must be made. Meanwhile, urban taste issues, chlorine notes, aging pipes, gave marketers friction to push against. In certain neighborhoods, rusty water turned a faucet into a coin toss. The reality was complex. Many systems were safe, some violated standards, most fell somewhere in between. Complexity doesn't sell, simplicity does. A cold bottle with condensation says no surprises. Here's where it gets subtle. The language around purity migrated from medical claims to aesthetic claims. Fewer calories than soda, no sugar, clean taste. The industry started to position water as a better packaged drink, not a replacement for tap. That framing unlocked shelf space near soda coolers and let price sit between a vending machine Coke and a free glass of tap. Suddenly, value wasn't safety, it was convenience plus image. Advertising leaned into ritual again. A runner laces shoes. A model steps off a runway. A young attorney hustles between depositions. The bottle is in every hand. The context does the work: aspirational, controlled, modern. You don't need to trust infrastructure when you can trust branding. But there was one problem. If bottled water stayed premium, it would never become a daily habit. To transform a luxury sip into an everyday reach, the category needed throughput, distribution, and margins that could survive a race to the bottom. That required the soda playbook: warehouses, trucks, coolers, national accounts, and a product that could be produced anywhere at scale for pennies. The groundwork was laid by the very success of the EPA era. Municipal plants quietly achieved something remarkable: consistent, treated water delivered to almost every block. The pipelines were everywhere. The bottlers didn't need mountains, they needed taps and filtration rigs. But that leap, turning public water into private inventory, required narrative cover. The prestige myth couldn't vanish, it had to stretch. By the late 1980s, the market had two personalities. On one side, glass nostalgia and imported mountains. On the other, emerging plastics and domestic sources. Retailers noticed which one moved faster. Cases of plastic stacked well, priced low, and fit the American habit of buying in bulk. The green glass began to share shelf space with translucent cylinders that looked like everyday objects, not European artifacts. Everything was about to change when two familiar names peered over the fence. The soda giants had the trucks, the fridge doors, the vending contracts, and a problem: consumers drifting from sugary drinks. Water looked like a lifeboat, but they weren't going to climb the Alps. They were going to open a valve across town. The prestige myth would survive, just repackaged to hide in plain sight. The tap in disguise: Aquafina, Dasani, and the purified pivot. Coke and Pepsi didn't chase glaciers, they chased logistics. Aquafina launched with Pepsi's distribution muscle. Dasani followed under Coca-Cola's coolers and contracts. Both were built on a simple equation: take municipal water, run it through reverse osmosis and ultraviolet light, polish the taste, and bottle it near where it's sold. No mountains, no long-haul shipments from Europe, no fragile glass. Just taps, filters, and trucks already rolling. Here's the quiet brilliance: the product could be made anywhere with a hose, power, and cleanroom discipline. The cost of the water itself was tiny, fractions of a penny per ounce. The real costs were plastic, caps, labels, and refrigerated space at eye level. But Pepsi and Coke had already paid for most of that space with soda. Water could slot into the same system with almost no friction. Labels did a lot of lifting. Early Aquafina labels tucked a phrase in fine print from public water sources. Dasani used similar language, focusing the front-facing copy on purified water and consistent taste. The words sounded scientific enough to be reassuring and vague enough to avoid the visual of a municipal pipe. The mountain silhouettes and silver-blue gradients did the rest. Consumers read with their eyes, not their magnifying glasses. The cold bottle, the condensation, the absence of chlorine smell, those cues told a story that felt purer than a faucet. Meanwhile, distribution scale made it omnipresent. Stadiums, airports, office fridges, school vending machines. The same two brands followed people across their day. The more places they appeared, the more normal they felt. Ubiquity was trust disguised as convenient. The economics were ruthless in their simplicity. A facility could take city water, run reverse osmosis membranes to strip dissolved solids, zap microbes with UV, sometimes add a mineral blend for taste, and hit a target profile every time. That consistent taste mattered. Tap water shifts by season, source, and pipe. Aquafina and Dasani were designed to never surprise your tongue, whether you were in Phoenix or Philadelphia. There was a flashpoint. In 2007, after media pressure in the UK revealed Dasani's purified tap origin and a separate contamination incident forced a recall there, the conversation crossed the Atlantic. In the US, consumer groups pushed for clearer labeling, and Aquafina said it would spell it out: public water sources. For a week, it seemed like the aura might crack. Then sales barely moved. The habit had taken root. If anything, the clarification normalized the model. Of course, it's treated local water. What matters is that it's filtered. While that was happening in New York, the soda aisle was morphing. Diet soda loyalty was wobbling, parents were policing sugar, and schools were banning vending machine contracts with high-calorie beverages. Bottled water became the friendly option that kept the fridge full and the brand names present. Coke and Pepsi didn't need every bottle to be a prestige purchase. They needed volume and margins stable enough to replace lost soda dollars. Get this: marketing didn't hammer safety, it sidestepped it. Ads showed athletes, clear blue skies, crisp fonts. The words leaned on purity and refreshment, not pathogens. Fear was implied, not shouted. Your city might have issues, but we have consistency. That positioning let the brands be aspirational without litigating public infrastructure on screen. Behind the scenes, the plants multiplied. Purification lines popped up near major metro areas, often drawing from the same municipal systems that residents used. The advantage was speed. Water could be purified, bottled, and trucked to stores within hours. No waiting on transatlantic shipping. No inventory risk if a regional campaign suddenly spiked demand. The system could flex like soda. Meanwhile, convenience stores became conversion engines. A 1.79 $20-ounce bottle felt cheaper than a $2.19 soda, even if the margin on water was often better. Multipacks did similar work in big box stores. 24 bottles for a few dollars created a new household ritual: cases in the trunk, bottles in a cooler, hydration as a grab-and-go reflex. Once fridges were stocked, home tap lost another daily use. There was one problem baked into purified. Strip everything out with reverse osmosis and you also strip taste. That's why some lines added controlled amounts of minerals back, a manufactured clean profile. It wasn't mountain terroir, it was consistency engineering. For many buyers, that was the point. Predictable beat character. Critics argued the obvious. If the source is public water, why not drink tap? The industry answered with two moves. First, taste, no chlorine notes, no metallic hints. Second, portability, single-serve packaging fits modern life. The rebuttal to refilling a reusable bottle was convenience and certainty theater. A sealed cap says nobody else touched this. That seal became a symbol of control. The pivot worked because it rewired bottling from scarcity to scale without shedding the aura. The brands borrowed the prestige glow of purity, then hid the municipal umbilical cord in fine print and process diagrams. They didn't defeat tap. They privatized it, polished it, and sold it back through soda coolers. And once that became normal, the market stopped asking where water came from and started asking which shelf it sat on. Manufacturing doubt. The war on tap water. Fear didn't need a megaphone. It needed timing. Industry PR shops learned to wait for a crack, a water main break on the evening news, a boil water advisory after a storm, a photo of brown tap filling a bathtub, and then press. Press releases slid to editors. Consumers deserve a safer, better-tasting option. Ads quietly appeared near affected zip codes, framed with clean whites and pale blues. The pitch wasn't panic, it was relief. If the faucet feels uncertain, the bottle feels controlled. Meanwhile, something else was happening in boardrooms. Trade groups met regulators and mayors at conferences, offering hydration partnerships when cities struggled with trust. Branded coolers showed up at marathons and school fundraisers. The message piggybacked on charity. We're here when infrastructure fails. The logic traveled fast. If the city calls a boil advisory today, maybe tomorrow's water is risky too. The exceptional became the everyday. What nobody knew at the time was how sticky that feeling would be. Once a community experiences discolored water, even briefly, taste memories linger. Chlorine that once signaled safety started reading as chemical. Marketers understood it. Campaigns bypassed claims about germs and leaned into refreshing, crisp, clean taste. The subtext was simple. If you can taste the system, you can't trust it. Then came the crises that turned local fear into national stigma. Flint wasn't a story about bottled water. It became bottled water's proof point. News crews filmed pallets arriving like aid shipments. Families filled bathtubs with single-use bottles because pipes were poisoned. The industry didn't cause that disaster, but it didn't miss the moment. We stand with Flint banners masked a deeper lesson. If a city can fail that badly, who's to say yours is safe? This was the moment everything changed for school districts and offices. Facility managers replaced fountains with coolers out of an abundance of caution. Parents sent kids with 2 bottles just in case. Offices saw fewer cups under taps and more cases under desks. Tap wasn't just free, it was suspect. The bottle became a badge of prudence. While that was happening on Main Street, the airwaves filled with selective storytelling. A pipe rupture in a century-old system turned into a montage about aging infrastructure nationwide. Rare violations became patterns in edited reels. When cities corrected problems, the fixes got less airtime than the failures. The imbalance did the work. It wasn't misinformation, it was emphasis, calibrated to tilt a decision in the grocery aisle. Get this, municipal water has to publish reports. Violations are posted. Data is public. That transparency, meant to build trust, created fodder for doubt. A minor exceedance on a Tuesday morning read scarier than it was because it lived in print. Bottled water, sitting under food rules, didn't have to deliver that level of disclosure to consumers. Silence looked like safety. There was one problem for bottlers. They couldn't promise safer in absolute terms without legal exposure, so they promised certainty instead. Purified, microfiltered, consistent taste, quality you can count on. The theater of control showed up everywhere: the tamper ring, the sterile plant footage, the stainless steel pipes glinting in ads. It wasn't a claim about pathogens, it was a feeling of process. Meanwhile, across town, public health advocates were pulling their hair out. They knew the math. In most places, tap water, continuously monitored, disinfected, reported, was as safe or safer than a bottle that might sit in a hot truck for days. But nuance loses to narrative. Usually safe can't compete with a cap's click and a label's mountain gradient. To understand how deep the doubt ran, follow the money into office contracts. Companies swapped fountains for 5-gallon jugs. Service reps dropped in every week, offering sanitation assurances and filter replacements. Procurement officers justified the expense as employee wellness. Once those invoices started, they rarely stopped. The habit rewired budgets. Unknown to them, across town, the same story played out in hospitals and universities during construction seasons. A temporary water shutoff, bring in pallets, a brown water flush after pipe work, extend the order. Temporary became default. The visual of bottles stacked high reassured administrators who didn't want calls at 3 a.m. about funny-tasting water. The most effective tactic wasn't ads, it was absence. When a crisis hit, bottlers didn't need to attack tap directly. They just showed up, filled the gap, and let neighbors tell neighbors. My kid's school switched to bottles. Our office did too. Social proof moved faster than any regulation. And here's the twist you'll see later. That very doubt campaign set the stage for the next reveal. While consumers were coached to distrust the faucet, new science started peeking into the bottle itself, finding things people weren't expecting to drink. The irony would land hard. But first, the industry's story had to saturate the culture. Taste equals trust, and trust comes sealed. What's in the bottle? Microplastics, PFAS, and the unknowns. Fear sold the bottle. Now open it. Start with the tiniest clue, plastic you can't see. Researchers began dissolving sealed bottles and scanning them with lasers and microscopes. What they found wasn't a stray fiber or two, it was a blizzard. Studies have detected hundreds to tens of thousands of microplastic particles per liter in popular brands, far higher than average levels measured in many taps. The pieces looked like what you'd expect from a factory. Fragments, films, and fine threads that match caps and bottle polymers. Here's where it gets crazy. Switch the lens to nanoplastics, particles so small they slip past standard filters and most lab methods. When teams used newer techniques, counts jumped again. Not every lab agrees on the exact numbers, methods vary, and this field is evolving. But the direction is consistent. The smaller you look, the more you find. And the likely source isn't a polluted spring, it's the packaging itself. Caps shed when you twist them. Bottles shed when they're molded, stacked, and rattled through transport. Stakes matter. Microplastics aren't just inert confetti. They can carry additives, plasticizers, flame retardants, and pick up pollutants as they move. Animal studies suggest inflammatory responses, but human health effects at everyday doses are still being mapped. That uncertainty cuts both ways. For risk-averse parents mixing formula, unknown doesn't sound safer than tap. Meanwhile, something else was riding along: PFAS, the forever chemicals used in everything from non-stick pans to firefighting foam.